Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for your patience. This was due to me, only to me, because I had some questions to ask Scott. I would like to start this live stream with thanking all of you for being here with us and really asking you to subscribe to my channel. I know it's kind of selfish because we are so close to 100K and this will mean a lot to me if I accomplish this while being still in Moscow. Because me and my guest today, who does not need introduction on my channel, Mr. Scott Ritter, we kind of always switch. I'm here, he's in US, he's in Moscow, I'm somewhere else. So welcome back, Scott. So good to see you back after a few months of your absence on my channel.
Well, thanks for having me, and it's good to be back.
Thank you. So I have several topics today. I have about 5 topics, but we have to start with, I guess, because people are expecting this. A few hours ago, the news was delivered that Alexei Navalny is dead, and this is according to Reuters, that he was reportedly felt unwell and immediately lost consciousness, and that was provided by the Russian prison service. Scott, since I have to admit to my audience here and to you, I was not following the story of Navalny closely at all. I was not into politics that much at that time. So I would like to ask you, what is the story with Navalny and your take on this situation now in Russia?
Well, first of all, let's just start off with the loss of life is always a tragedy, and whatever I think of Alexei Navalny as a person, what I think of his activities is irrelevant. He has a wife who's mourning his death, and he has children who are mourning his death. So let's just be straight up and acknowledge that this is, for some people, a human tragedy. But we also have to acknowledge that this is not a good man. And I know my wife always tells me never speak ill of the dead. And so, but if I follow that guidance, then we don't have much of a conversation right now. So, honey, if you're watching, I apologize, but my wife and I had this conversation this morning on the way to work. Alexei Navalny was a traitor to Russia, straight up traitor. Now he's the byproduct of a category of Russians who, he was 47 years old. So in the 1990s, this is when he was raised. This is where he came into adulthood. And Russia at that time was fundamentally broken, a fundamentally broken state. The collapse of the Soviet Union, many Russians no longer identified in the classic sense as Russians. They were confused, they were bitter, and they looked to the West for their solutions. They were enthralled with the West, and also many Russians fell into very xenophobic, racist, ways of thinking. Alexei Navalny was a racist. He's a white supremacist, straight up. Look, my wife is Georgian. He called Georgians cockroaches. He called them bugs. He did an infamous commercial talking about how to, when you get an infestation of cockroaches and flies, you use slippers and fly swatters. But he said, there's some that are big. How do you handle it? And then he shoots them. And he says, I prefer a handgun. He shot a Chechen. I mean, that was the whole idea, is he shot a Muslim. So he's basically saying that the Muslim infestation in Russia needed to be handled by Russians with handguns. This is a disgusting human being, a disgusting human being. Now, he got, caught up in the investigation of corruption. And I'll tell you what, investigating corruption was, it's a business back then because Russia was corrupt. Let's not pretend otherwise. Russia in the 1990s was a thoroughly corrupt nation, thoroughly corrupt society. And the Russian government was open to these kind of accusations. But he didn't do this because he wanted to help Russia. He did this because he hated Russia and he loved or at least he proclaimed his love for the West. He's one of those category of Russians that basically said, I identify more with the West than I do with Mother Russia, because he didn't know what Mother Russia was. Go ahead.
So, just using my sense here, was he a CIA agent?
Well, I'm getting to that. Back when, I mean, he was doing this work, and a lot of his funding came from non-governmental organizations, NGOs, which are fronts. In Russia, they were especially fronts for U.S. and British intelligence activity, who funneled money through these non-governmental organizations as a mechanism of achieving control in Russia. They went in under the disguise of promoting democracy, but American democracy, when we promote democracy, it's never about democracy, it's about control. How do we control? And one of the ways they controlled was to look at the media and talk about, how we have accuracy, how we fight disinformation, how we promote, quality journalism and things of that nature. But then they also, anti-corruption is a big one, because anti-corruption allows you to create an us versus them mentality that then can be exploited by media control. And the whole idea is to shape the minds of a targeted audience. And Navalny became a tool of this. His anti-corruption campaigns were publicized by non-governmental organizations who were paid by the CIA and British intelligence to generate storylines that were anti-Russian, especially after the fall of Boris Yeltsin and the rise of Vladimir Putin. The goal of the CIA and the MI6, or the Secret Intelligence Service, was to take down Putin, to bring him down. And they were doing that, trying to build up a political opposition. And Navalny was a player in this. Back at that time, the lead guy was Nemtsov. He was Boris Nemtsov, a Yeltsin insider who was positioning himself to be, the lead opposition to Vladimir Putin. Nemtsov was later assassinated in Moscow by Chechens who were arrested and convicted of that crime. But the thing about Navalny is he rose to the attention of the United States, and he basically was selected to go to Yale as part of one of these young people of prominence programs. It was an internship to Yale where he would go there, participate in seminars, and then receive an education, etc. But the thing about this is he was groomed by the U.S. Embassy. Michael McFaul was the ambassador. I'll tell you how I know I hit a nerve with Michael McFaul, because I told him straight up, I said, Michael McFaul, you know what you did with Navalny. You groomed him. The CIA groomed him. The CIA brought a package to you and said, here, we need you to sign off on this application to Yale, because we've got to send our boy there to get more specific training. And McFaul, of course, did it. And as soon as I hit McFaul with that fact, he blocked me because he didn't want to talk about it, because he knows it. He said, I didn't know Navalny. I said, you knew him very well. You met with him often. You signed off on the paperwork that sent him to Yale. Block. When he got to Yale, and I'm writing an article about this, so I don't want to give away too much to the article, but if you take a look at the Yale website, you'll notice that there's a coordinator for the particular class. Read his biography. An intelligence officer. He's a groomer. That's what he does. That's his whole program. This whole program is about picking leaders from around the world, bringing them to the United States, to Yale, and skull and crossbones. The Yale connection to the CIA is well known. And they come in there, and you have a groomer, and his job is to facilitate the connectivity between these people. Not all pass the test, not all are worthy of CIA attention, and the domestic CIA, offices. They're in New York City. They go to Yale. They go to Boston, to Harvard, often to meet these people. But the CIA maintains a very large and robust domestic presence, and their job is to look for people who come to the United States to see if they can recruit them. They also are used to debrief foreigners who go abroad, see things and come back. The CIA that's a voluntary program. But Navalny was brought to the United States for the specific purpose of being groomed and trained by the CIA to be returned to Russia, where he would become an opposition figure that the CIA and British intelligence would fund for the purpose of bringing down Vladimir Putin. Straight up, that's all he existed for. And if you're an American and you think that's good policy, then I guess you view this guy as a hero. I mean, hey, he's working for the team, man. He's out there doing the good stuff. But if you're a Russian, understand that he's a traitor, a straight up traitor, committed treason. And I think that's why you have the departure. Now, as an American, though, I have to ask, is this really the policy we want? Do we really want to pursue a policy of trying to bring down Russia, to alienate ourselves from Russia? Because remember, at the time that this was happening, Putin is sitting there saying, hey, we really do want to have good relations with you guys. We really do, but you're making it hard because you're trying to attack us. We know what you're doing. And Putin wasn't stupid. Putin told Clinton, he told Bush, he told Obama, we know what you're doing. We know exactly what you're doing, and we know why you're doing it. Please stop doing it, because we would actually like to be friends with the West. What Navalny was the living embodiment of the corruption of the West, how the West never intended to live in peace with Russia and was using Russia's predilection to gravitate towards the West because, like I said, in the decade of the 90s, Russia lost touch with who they are. One thing that Vladimir Putin has done in Russia over the course of the 24 years that he's been in power is to teach Russians how to fall in love with Russia again. And today, Russia is a very patriotic nation. People are embracing the Orthodox Church. People are embracing Russian culture. The new foreign policy that was published last summer talks about the unique character of Russian civilization. And the Russian people are learning to be proud of identifying as Russians. Navalny came from that generation where many Russians rejected the notion of saying, I'm a Russian. They were ashamed of being Russian, and they were trying to define themselves, in the West. And in some ways, you could say that he was, a prisoner of his times, that he was one of these, a tragic story of somebody who had lost his way. I would buy into that, except for I go back to the beginning. This is a man who called Georgians cockroaches and advocated the shooting of Chechens. He's not a good man. His soul is dark. This isn't somebody who was led astray, went down the wrong path. Look, I have friends who fall into the Navalny camp. They're not bad people. They're just confused about Russia. They have a vision of what they think Russia should be, but they don't understand that in order for Russia to go down that path, Russia has to sell out to the West. And Russia already has an experience of selling out to the West. The decade of the 1990s, the catastrophe where millions of Russians died because of the West's indifference towards Russia. I try to tell every Russian that sadly, the West collectively doesn't like you. They don't care about you. And they will do harm to you if you let them. That the best defense for Russia is to be Russian, to say, no, we're good people. We have good culture. We love who we are. And if Russia behaves in that manner, then they can stand up as the equals to the West and hopefully get the West to realize the errors of their way and for the West to start to gravitate, not to become Russia, but to say we can be friends with Russia. And of course, that's what you and I are advocating. We're not advocating becoming Russian. The last thing I could ever be is a Russian. I'm American to the core, for all the good and the bad that entails. But that doesn't mean that I can't like the Russians and I don't want to live in peace with the Russians, because I do. I like the Russians. I want to live in peace with the Russians as an American, not as a Russian. I don't want to transform into something I can never be. And this is what Russians have to understand too. You can live in peace and harmony with the West. You can like the West without becoming the West. Be proud of who you are. Navalny was a man who wasn't proud of being Russian. Navalny is a man who sold out in the worst possible way. He was a CIA asset, straight up. And I think that's one of the reasons why he's so detested and reviled in Russia. He never had more than 3 to 5% support. He was never going to be a viable opposition leader, but his job was never to win an election. His job was to destroy democracy in Russia. And I'll tell you why. Because Russia, left to its own ways, if democracy grew from the grassroots, they'd keep electing Vladimir Putin because he's a pretty damn good president. who's done a good job by Russia, dragged them out of the decade of the 90s to get to Russia to where they are today. I'm sure we'll probably talk about Tucker Carlson, but Tucker Carlson is out there talking about being radicalized by Moscow. Well, yes, Tucker, Moscow's pretty cool, isn't it? It's the exact opposite of what you thought it would be based upon, anti-Russian propaganda that is propagated in the United States. But I'll give you a news flash, Tucker. All of Russia is pretty cool. Moscow's not this unique bastion of culture and good living. All of Russia is pretty cool. They've got culture throughout all of Russia. All of Russia lives in a decent way. Maybe not like Moscow. Moscow's big city, gets a lot of money. But the rest of Russia is not failing either. It's doing quite well. And I think that this is the reality that Russians have learned to appreciate, and now we have to get the West to appreciate it as well.
Thank you so much for explaining, Scott. I really appreciate. How much time do we have? Because I want to go a little bit deeper in this topic with Navalny. How much time we have?
We have till 12 noon.
So is it like 1 more hour or so?
We have 30 more minutes.
Oh, okay. So I would like to know more about this, but we can reschedule a talk maybe.
Okay. Maybe next week we can do
quick question. Yes. Okay. Quick question here. The timing of his passing, did he die or he was killed? That's a different story. But the timing of it, in a month from now, we will have here in Moscow. I say we because I'm here now. I'm not Russian. I'm not voting here. I say we because I feel like I belong at this moment. Presidential election in Russia, right? So what I'm really wondering, Scott, the timing of it.
Well, the timing, first of all, because there's a lot of conspiracy theorists out there who say, obviously Putin killed him because he's afraid of him. Navalny had no impact on the elections. In fact, the worst thing could happen for Putin is for Navalny to die. Literally the worst thing, because it's creating this speculation, it's creating this negativity. Why bring it on? This is what happened to Navalny. He was imprisoned on corruption charges. The charges are real. In the West, they'll say it's all made up. William Browder, who himself is a very corrupt man, Heritage Capital, stole money. His non-lawyer lawyer, Magnitsky, died in prison. And it led to the Magnitsky Act, which led to Magnitsky sanctions and the sanctioning of Russia, purely political. Browder will say, oh, these are trumped up charges. Well, Browder, your corruption charges aren't trumped up. You're guilty as hell. And so was Navalny. Navalny was guilty of corruption. But, he was given every chance to get the hell out of Russia. This poisoning thing. I mean, again, I don't know exactly what happened. The Russians put Novichok, the most dangerous chemical in the world. I mean, one whiff, boom, 1 million people die, and they impregnated his underwear with this apparently, but it didn't kill him. So how can it be Novichok? How can it be the most dangerous poison in the world if it didn't kill him? But so some people think that it was a put on by Navalny, but the Russians were like, get the hell out of here. If you want to go, we'll let you. They had the guy dead to rights on corruption charges. He's going to go to jail. And what the Russians did is said, no, you can leave. Go to the West. And he did. What's the first thing that Navalny did when he got to the West after getting everybody to say, yes, you died of, you were poisoned with Novichok, but we're not going to release any of the evidence. We're just going to say it happened. He colluded with the CIA production team in Germany to produce a film that exposed the corruption of Vladimir Putin. One of the things they did is talk about this giant villa in Crimea, but when it was just obviously a fake job, but that's who he is. He's a man who works with the CIA to bring down Vladimir Putin. If Navalny was smart, he would have stayed the hell out of Russia. He would have at that time just said, no. But he was cocky, and I think his handlers were cocky, and they felt, and again, this tells anybody out there, don't work with the CIA because they don't care about you. And they let him go back to Russia, believing that the trial would create political unrest. Nobody in Russia cares about this man. They all know who he is. He's a traitor, and he was guilty of sin. He went to trial, found guilty, went to prison. The prison term that he had sent him to a specific kind of prison. It's specific. You You go to the prison that is based upon the charge and the time that you have. While he was in prison, additional charges came up. He came back for trial. He was found guilty, got a bigger sentence, which means his sentence now is bigger than the prison that he's in supports. So he was transferred to a more difficult. While he was in that first prison, we know that he had medical problems. He admitted, doctors came. So he was an unhealthy person already. They transferred him to this harsher regime in the Arctic Circle. And he died of bad health. Could the Russians have done something different? Sure. I mean, I would have said, I don't want this guy to die of bad health. I would have put him in a lower security prison where he could get, good medical assistance, et cetera. Except this man was going to die in prison. His sentence was such that he wasn't coming home. Everybody thought that he was going to come out of this. He was going to die in prison no matter what. And so the Russians were like, well, if he's going to die in prison, why are we going to make an exception? I mean, we have good medical facilities up there, but Navalny was a man in bad health. He died of natural causes. Nobody assassinated him. The CIA didn't get into the prison thing and kill him. So this would be, it's just bad luck that Navalny died, in a month before the Russian the presidential elections. It's a tragedy again. A human being dying. Nobody wants that. But he brought it on himself. He's in prison not because he's a political prisoner. He's in prison because he's a corrupt son of a bitch. He's in prison because he got greedy, and he's lucky. And this is where the Russians were smart, because they had the goods on him. They could have charged him with espionage at any time. But here's the reason why they didn't charge him with espionage. If they accused Navalny of being a CIA agent, they would have convicted him of that charge. And now the CIA gets to come in and trade him and say, okay, we want our boy out and we'll give you this person there. We see that. Remember, Putin had that conversation with Tucker about Evan Gershkovich, the Wall Street Journal guy. They're talking about trading, horse trade, because Evan is a CIA asset. The CIA doesn't negotiate with the Russian security services to trade somebody who's not a CIA asset. Navalny, had he been convicted on espionage charges, would have been up for being traded. Russians didn't want to trade this guy, so they convicted him on basic corruption charges. And that's what he was in jail for. And there's nothing the CIA could do. They can't come in and say, oh, that guy you have in there for corruption is really one of us. So we need him out. The Russians wanted him in prison. They just wanted him out of the way. Like I said, remember, they let him go. They said, go, get out of here. And he left. And he didn't have to come back. He could have stayed out there. But he came back because he was supposed to engage in a process, the politicization of his criminal trial, that would have, according to the West, promoted anti-Putin sentiment. It backfired because all Russians know who this man is. He's a traitor. He's not a good person. And his conviction came and went. Nobody cared. He went to prison. Nobody cared. And he died in prison. Nobody in Russia cares. Everybody that cared in Russia fled when Putin invaded Ukraine, the special military operation. Remember those 200,000 Russians that fled? They were all Navalny supporters. They were all the little people like, oh, no, we don't like Vladimir Putin. Oh, no, we're going to do this. And so they all ran away. And the Russians that stayed behind went, good riddance. Get the hell out of here. We don't want you back. Now, the vast majority of those 200,000 that fled are saying, can we come home now? Because the West sucks. And we'd really like to come back home to Russia. And, because the Russians are kind, they say, okay, come on back. I mean, it is what it is. But Navalny, he should have stayed out. But he came back. He tried to undermine Vladimir Putin's rule. He was convicted on corruption charges, and he died in prison.
Thank you, Scott. I will try to ask 2 more questions if I will squeeze in this time we have. I had really cool questions today, but maybe next time. And everyone who is asking in the super chat, I appreciate, but since we don't have much time, next live stream with Scott, we will address those questions. So, Zelensky flew to Berlin. Ja, genau, I would say. Ukraine signed a pact with Germany. So during his visit to Berlin, Ukraine and Germany concluded an agreement on security cooperation. The agreement is valid for 10 years and assumes, for example, that in 2024, Germany will allocate 7 billion euros to support Ukraine. The document's priorities areas are bilateral security cooperation, military, political, financial, and humanitarian. An agreement will also come into place with France. Scott, your thoughts on this? What is going on with this joke?
Well, it is a joke. First of all, 7 billion euros. I mean, if I were a German farmer, I'd be furious because the German government has ended farming subsidies so they can divert that money to Ukraine. So Germany clearly says that we care more about Ukraine than we do about German farmers or the German people. But 7 billion euros doesn't solve any of Ukraine's problems. Ukraine just received a $54 billion allocation from the European Union. It's spread over 3 years. I think it's about 18 billion euro per year. But that doesn't solve anything. Even with this infusion of money, Ukraine is 20 to 30 billion dollars short of what they need to function as a government. And they can't function without the international community putting money on the table because Ukraine's economy is non-functioning. So the 7 billion is absolute joke. No, there is no security guarantees there, and neither will there be with France. Why? Because both agreements state up that they need this war to end before they can give those guarantees, because both Germany and France knows that a security guarantee given to Ukraine now in a time of war means that Germany and France go to war with Russia, and they can't. It's interesting that the Germans are talking about allocating 7 billion euros to Ukraine during this time. The German defense minister just came out and said, we can't make our 2% GDP commitment to NATO because our economy is collapsing. We can't make it. So apparently what Donald Trump is saying about NATO not able to step up and why should America step up and back them up is a true statement, because the European economy is collapsing now. Germany's economy deindustrializing as we speak. Industries are fleeing or just shutting down because they can't afford to stay in business. The same thing with France, the same thing with England. All of Europe is just going down the toilet bowl of life. So they can't make this 2% GDP requirement, but they all sit there and they insist on committing political and economic suicide by allocating money to Ukraine, which is insufficient to the task. It's not solving the Ukraine problem. Ukraine is a defeated nation as we speak. While Zelensky went to Berlin, the fortress town of Adviivka is falling. The Ukrainians have said the battle's over. We are trying to retreat, but we can't. We're trapped. 2,000 to 4,000 hardcore Nazi Azov soldiers are trapped in Adviivka, and they can't get them out. They're all going to die or surrender. And when the Russians take this town, it punches a huge hole in the Ukrainian lines, and they don't have troops to fill the gap. They've got nothing, literally. So Zelensky's out there in a fantasy world about, give me aid, I can do this, I can do that. Meanwhile, back on the front lines, it's game, set, match. The Russians are dragging through. Now, there's a lot of Ukrainians in uniform right now. Zelensky talked about 880,000 of them last month. Around 50 to 60,000 of them have perished in the past month. So we're down to close to 800,000. Next month, we'll be down to about 750. The next month after, down to 70. There's no new troops coming in. Meanwhile, the Russians are getting stronger at a rate of 30 to 40,000 additional troops every month because 1,500 Russians are volunteering every day to serve in the special military operation because the Russians are patriotic and the Ukrainians are not. So, what Zelensky doing is just a joke. It's fantasy land. And what the Germans are signing up to, again, is just politicized nonsense. It means nothing.
Scott, so here I had a tough decision to choose last question because I really wanted to ask you this question, and I came across something that I really want to share with you. And because when we connect, I know a lot of people are watching the videos. So I hope they will pay attention to how they are playing with our minds and how they are fooling us. And they always have been with the scripts, Hollywood movies, etc. They tell us in advance what they're gonna do, and they put it in our subconscious mind. So why I'm saying this? Butcher, it's the nickname of this new general that was appointed to replace Zaluzhny, correct? So recently, I'm on YouTube, and YouTube recommends me a video, which is a trailer. It's a clip of the new HBO series that is called The Regime, and I will read here. Kate Winslet plays the main part here. The series is a year within the palace of a crumbling authoritarian regime. After not leaving the palace for quite some time, Chancellor Jelena Wernham, like a German name, kind of, becomes increasingly paranoid and unstable and turns out to volatile soldier Herbert Zubak, who becomes her confidant, and his nickname is Butcher. So I said to myself, they are showing this cut in our face. Literally, they created a series. I don't watch this stuff anymore. I don't waste money on this, but well, really we have to, because they kind of tell us on HBO with Kate Winslet. I will not attach the link. You find this, guys, The Regime. This is the title. And the name, because this trailer struck me. I said, Butcher? This is what Scott Ritter was just talking about. The name of this general. So Scott, butcher or no butcher, like what is really the point at this point? Because they even make this series that the regime is crumbling.
Well, as somebody who has pitched proposals to HBO, and I'm familiar with the production aspects of it, understand that they didn't make this last month. This was something that was probably pitched 2 years ago, or more. Then it had to go into production. They had to line up the actors, the money, make sure everybody's schedules coincide. So this thing could have been pitched 3-4 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago. But it doesn't matter, because the theme is timeless. It's when they talk about a crumbling regime, they talk about paranoia. They're talking about Putin. This is targeting Russia, not Ukraine. The butcher is just a name. It's coincidence, I think, that Syrskyi, this new general, is the butcher. But Syrskyi's rise to prominence is recent. I mean, to be honest, anybody who studied Ukraine knows that he existed, knows what his nickname was. But it wasn't until recently that his name is put out there and his nickname was. I don't think HBO's tuned into Ukraine enough to say 3 years ago, 5 years ago, yeah, we're going to name this character Butcher after Syrskyi. I just think that somebody said it's a cool nickname for a military guy who portrays certain characteristics. But the regime, it targets Putin. It's the fantasy of Putin. Now they cast the lead as a female, not a male, but listen to what they're saying. It's the exact same thing that various CIA officers have been saying for some time about Putin: paranoid, trapped in his own crumbling regime. And the idea, the idea is to, create the notion of how this place collapses. And so that's what it's done. It's done to condition America about an autocracy, not about Zelensky, but about an autocracy. The Biden administration has been posturing itself, democracy versus autocracy since it came in. This has been the theme of dating back to the Obama administration. And this thing may have been pitched during the Obama administration, because Kate Winslet's a pretty popular actress, and getting her schedule, so she can commit the time to a series like this. But I think this is more about Putin, not about Ukraine. I think this is about conditioning the American people into, accepting that when the U.S. government says autocracy, everybody's gonna say, I saw that series on HBO. I now know what an autocracy is, and I know what an autocrat is. Vladimir Putin's an autocrat, and so is Kate Winslet. And that's how they control people this direction. And HBO is thoroughly guilty of. Look, like I said, I've done the Hollywood pitch thing. I've gone in and pitched to, Lionsgate and HBO and all of these actors. And I know exactly how these producers think, and I know what they're looking for, and I know how stupid they are, and I know how politicized they are, and I know how they want to build a project that projects some sort of political platform onto the American public.
Thank you, Scott. So this didn't work on me because actually the first thing I thought was Zelensky. So I actually reversed it. I reversed the whole thing. But I guess because I have guts like yourself, so I already know what's happening. Do we have time for one more question? We have 10 more minutes.
We do.
Okay. Washington accuses Russia of placing a nuclear weapons in space. What's up with this story?
Well, what's up with this story is that, the United States has for some time now discarded treaties with Russia that have become inconvenient to us. The anti-ballistic missile treaty. We didn't like the idea of mutually assured destruction. We felt that Russia was weak and that we would exploit our technological superiority to put in place a missile shield that we said was for Iran, but was really for Russia to give us a unilateral advantage. So we withdrew from the treaty. And then we deployed a missile shield. The Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. We didn't like the idea of China being able to have intermediate nuclear ranged weapons that we couldn't have because of this treaty with the Soviet Union. But now Russia's there. Russia's weak. We're just going to withdraw. We're going to lie about a Russian capability, withdraw from that treaty so that we can match the Chinese. The treaty became inconvenient. Open skies. We didn't like the idea of the Russians flying over our cities, over our bases. So we withdrew from the treaty. Inconvenient. And then the treaties that we do have, like New START, the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, were negotiated in bad faith. Anatoly Antonov, the current ambassador of Russia to the United States, was the negotiator of this treaty. He said that, the Americans lied straight up, that certain terms that are in the treaty were assumed to mean something based upon the negotiation. But afterwards, the Americans said, no, it doesn't say that in the treaty. So we're going to interpret it this way, which gives them the ability to rapidly increase the number of warheads in a time of crisis, unilateral advantage. And so the Russians have basically said, we're tired of you using treaties, getting out of treaties that are inconvenient to you, and then using existing treaties as a way to promote your to give you a unilateral advantage over us. The United States has built a way of waging war that is very dependent upon intelligence surveillance capabilities, satellites that are up there, taking pictures, communicating data all up, and also communication satellites so that somebody can talk instantly from Washington, D.C. to a battlefield anywhere in the world, instant data transmission, get all the data in, things of that nature. Navigation, we can navigate precisely. We can guide our weapons in. And this is all dependent upon satellites. But the satellites that we had been deploying are rather big and bulky, and there's only a handful of them. And so the fear was that nations like Russia, China, North Korea, Iran could develop anti-satellite interceptors that could go up and take out major U.S. satellites and blind us in time of war. So we've developed a new satellite. It's a constellation of smaller satellites along the lines of Elon Musk's Starlink, and we're going to saturate these satellites in low Earth orbit, which makes them difficult to track and shoot down. And there's going to be so many. We're talking about hundreds of satellites, and these satellites will give us the ability to wage war the way we want to wage war. And the Russians are looking at that, and they look at the Outer Space Treaty, and they say, wait a minute, we signed a treaty with you in 1967 that said that space is supposed to be exclusively for peaceful use, but you've weaponized it, you've militarized it. And this isn't, passive, this is aggressive. You're building an offensive military capability that only you have. And we don't have enough interceptors. The whole idea of this thing is that the Russian interceptors can't shoot them all down. And the other thing about the design is if you take out 10 satellites, next week we can launch 10 more and replace them, and they fit right in. So the Russians are looking at that saying, if we go to war against the United States, and remember, it's not that we're pursuing the war, it's NATO and the United States that are talking about war. And we have to be concerned about this because if we do go to war against them, they're going to have this advantage from all these satellites. All their weapon systems are going to work. All their communication is going to be perfect unless we develop a weapon that can take them out. How do you take out hundreds of satellites in low Earth orbit? A nuclear explosion in outer space. You fry them all instantly. It's done, finished. So the Russians, I believe, have sat there and they've designed a weapon. They haven't deployed it yet because that'd be a violation of the treaty. But they designed a weapon. They may even be ready. And at some point in time, if the United States wanted to go to war, then Russia would use it. But I think we're going to end up having a discussion about the Outer Space Treaty now, because the United States is going to reach out to the Russians. And I think the Russians have a legitimate argument of saying, you've weaponized space. We didn't. You're in violation of the treaty. And unless you do something to stop this weaponization that gives you this unilateral advantage, then we're going to withdraw from the treaty. And when we do, we got the weapon that will end all of this. Mike Turner, who's the chair of the House Intelligence Committee, he's the guy on Wednesday who brought this to the public's attention, sort of cryptically, but he said, oh, there's this threat. Now, why did he do it on Wednesday? Because on Thursday, the White House was already scheduled to meet with the Gang of Eight, those the 4 senators and 4 representatives, the secret cabal, to talk about this very issue. This was already something that was on the radar of the White House and the Gang of Eight. Why bring it up on Wednesday? Well, what happened on Wednesday? On Wednesday, SpaceX, that's Elon Musk's company, launched 2 satellites as part of this constellation. Last year, they launched, I think, 28 of the satellites. They just launched 2 more research and development satellites. This program costs billions of dollars, at least 14 billion, probably more. It's a lot of money. And the entire American defense establishment is geared towards this program. And Turner's saying, time out. We're spending all this money on deploying satellites that our military is addicted to, meaning if we lose these satellites, we can't fight. We literally can't fight a war without these satellites. And we know the Russians have a weapon that'll take them all out. Why are we spending this money? Why are we doing this? What are we doing about this problem? Because we're heading down the highway to hell. Because if we're talking about confronting the Russians, talking about, going to war against the Russians, we just are giving Russia the ability to kill us all, because these satellites will stop working. When they stop working, we can't communicate. We have no intelligence. We have no guidance and control. We got nothing. And the Russians have everything because they're not as dependent upon satellites as we are. So I think that's why he leaked it, so that it could become part of the public debate. The problem is, in leaking it, he destroyed the source of information. From what the media is saying, this was raw intelligence, which means it's unprocessed intelligence, which means it's coming straight from the source. I doubt it's a human intelligence source, because they just wouldn't let members of Congress read human stuff. So it's a technical source, meaning that somehow we managed to find a way to intercept communications or data about this test. And there was a recent development dating back a couple months that exposed this. But now that Turner's talked about this, the Russians know that we know something about that. So they'll go back and reverse engineer, the meetings that took place, communications, and then they're going to shut it down, and we'll never hear about this again. And so at a time when we should actually be saying, hey, we need to know more about this, what the Russians intend, so that we can put together a negotiating package with the Russians to try and resolve this issue, we're going to go blind, deaf, dumb, and blind, because Mike Turner played politics with American national security.
Thank you, Scott, so much for explaining this. Now I feel like not only they want to destroy the planet Earth, now they are already playing in the space.
Oh, absolutely.
Wanting to destroy. Absolutely. It's insane. It's insane to me when you were describing all of this, the scale of it. It's insane. I don't want to take more of your time, because we have literally 1 more minute to 12 to noon. Thank you so much, Scott, for joining me today. Hopefully we connect soon again.
Look at yes. Not next Friday, but the Friday after next Friday. So in 2 weeks' time, let's get together.
Okay, super. The link to Scott Ritter Extra, where you have all the links to his books, every other platform, just subscribe there, is down below the live stream already. And hit that like, guys. It really helps.
Can I add something too?
Yes.
Add something
yes,
too?
Please.
You're going to send me a link to this, right? And then I'm going to put that link on my Twitter page, and I'm going to put it on my Telegram page. And people who aren't subscribed to you are going to see it. And so what I will tell people is this, that Anya and I have an ongoing relationship. It's platonic in nature, purely intellectual, but an ongoing online relationship that you're witnessing right now. And we're going to continue to have conversations of this nature. And please subscribe to her channel, because this is an important outlet. Anya challenges me like nobody else challenges me. She gets me to say things that I wouldn't say anywhere else. And if you like it, then subscribe, help her out. So it's important. So support Anya as much as possible.
Thank you, Scott, so much. I get emotional like when people say nice things. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time. Thank you everyone for watching. Stay safe. Lots of love in spite of the craziness. Until next time, everyone. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.